PvP, something that not many players will ever experience in the world of Don't Starve Together. For good reason too. The game's simply not built for it. But if you frequently watch my streams, you'll know that PvP can be fun when set up properly, or when using balancing mods like you are seeing on screen now. Honestly though, I've hosted so many standard PvP events and plan on hosting many more, so I believe I can comfortably rank each character by their PvP abilities. So today, you will not only learn advanced tips and tricks for PvP, but also which characters are the strongest for it. With the basics out of the way, let's begin. First, how exactly do you PvP in Don't Starve Together? Well, when you are generating a world, you'll notice an option, aptly labeled PvP. Turn this on, and boom, you now can engage in PvP on that world. When it comes to non-character specific PvP, there's a multitude of techs you can use, but a majority of conflict comes down to who can tank more damage, since kiting other players, unless they are a moose, is unreliable. We'll talk more about the moose thing in Woodie's segment. And then there's sleep. Be it by a pan flute, sleepy time stories, or even sleep darts, sleep weapons are by far the strongest PvP tools in the entire game. Sleep gives you an opportunity to hit your target for free for a few seconds, but it can be utilized even better with other mechanics. Cage a sleeping target in a 4x4 like this, and then you are free to blow them up with gunpowder or utilize other means of indirect combat, like fire. Due to Panflute's massive sleep duration, it's also very spammable, meaning you can very easily put them back to sleep if they do suddenly wake up. If you think this is OP, then you aren't alone. But in the base game, it's by far the best way to PvP. Other than that though, character-specific quirks can shape PvP encounters wildly, so let's begin going through each character's strengths and weaknesses in PvP. Man, I'm gonna say PvP a lot in this video, by the way, so just get ready. First up, we start with Wilson. And if it wasn't obvious, Wilson's blank state status doesn't help him much in any PvP situations. He does average damage, has average health, and has no quirks that make him more powerful than others. Wilson's strength in PvP is nothing. He's completely default, and that's his weakness, as he's better than no one. He gets a special difficulty rating. Due to how bland he is, I'm giving him the default rating. This isn't equal to any other difficulty rating on this list. Instead, it's more of a, well, he's default. Next up, we have Willow. And to be honest, she's probably the entire reason I made this video. On paper, Willow is not too bad. Bernie, as far as I know, doesn't attack other players, and she's capable of setting others on fire with her lighter. But it's once we start talking about her spells, is when Willow is seen as a dominator in the PvP field. Ignite can set characters on fire remotely, dealing lots of extra damage. Fireball spam can be used to overheat sleeping players, but the single best PvP skill as Willow is actually her Lunar Flame skill. This ability will stun lock and do tons of damage, all from a safe range. This skill is insanely powerful, but it doesn't come without its weaknesses. Thanks to her damage potential, Willow's strength is her embers. With them, she can unleash hellfire on anyone that even thinks about going near her. However, she is weak to crown shields, or really anything that provides invincibility frames, teleport abilities, since her Lunar Flame cast has a noticeable wind-up animation, and finally, ranged weaponry and Thorns effects, since both can knock her out of her spell. She also becomes weak when she runs out of embers, as she's basically just Wilson with fire immunity. Overall though, thanks to her insane power ramp and how easy it is to amass a fortune of embers, Willow is a very easy pick for PvP encounters. Next up, we have Wolfgang. While Wolfgang is overpowered in most aspects of the game, he just ends up being Wilson with more damage in PvP situations. Don't get me wrong, he's strong, very strong, if you have time to set up, that is. On his own, that 2 times damage multiplier won't get you anywhere against the literal superpowers some of these characters have, but he can be surprisingly good when combined with darts. As if shot when mighty, they can do 200 damage a pop, and that's nothing to scoff at, especially with how fast they can be shot. Wolfgang's strength is his double damage, which puts him ahead of pretty much every character with no unique quirks like Wilson. But his weakness is his sustainability, as Wolfgang will generally go insane first in a PvP situation, and fighting Terrorbeaks and another player can quickly become overwhelming for even the most skilled players. He also struggles when disengaging, as if his mighty meter drops below a certain threshold while running, he stops and plays an animation, giving his attacker ample time to catch up. This can be countered by simply holding a gem bell, however. Overall, Wolfgang is a standard PvP character that just does more damage. A medium difficulty pick. Next up, Wendy. Now, at the time of recording this, the beta is nearly finished, so it's probably safe to assume that most things will remain similar. And that's actually pretty great for Wendy. Pre-skill tree Wendy in PvP was pretty meh. Abigail is very easily stun-locked and dispatched. If she catches you off guard though, she could maybe stun-lock you, but that required poor positioning by her target. With the skill tree, Wendy becomes far more interesting. She's not as powerful as most of the characters, but when utilized correctly, she can absolutely dominate in PvP situations. And I'm excited to see what techs we can learn when her skill tree does fully release. Wendy's strengths are Abigail, as when utilized right, she can stunlock other players with the help of her. And her sustainability, as she's very unlikely to go insane during an engagement. Meaning if you can just hold out, then you can generally win a war of attrition with your foe, unless they're another Wendy. Her weaknesses are her low damage, meaning she can't out-tank other players without the help of Abigail, and the fact that she relies heavily on Abby, as she's not exactly hard to dispatch in PvP situations. For now, I would say Wendy is a medium pick for PvP. She's nowhere near as useless as Wilson, but other characters, even post-skill tree, have some advantages over her. Next up, we have WX78. And oh boy, are they one of, if not the strongest PvP characters in the entire game. And that all comes down to two circuits, Moggle Vision, and more importantly, Electro Circuits. Now, Electro Circuits are obvious, but what might not be obvious is just how effective they are for PvP. They dish back any damage that WX receives. This can lead to WX winning a PvP encounter while not lifting a single finger. You're even immune to Willow's Fire Blast. And Moggle Vision. Now, this may be less obvious, but if you've ever played on a PvP server, you'll know just how OP Moggles are. You can basically lurk in the dark and get the jump on any unsuspecting foe. WX having this potential built in makes them very, very powerful. WX78's strength come from these two circuits, and the fact that they can stockpile and eat gears for easy stat resets, if tanking other players. Now, the weakness is their charge. You see, while WX is nearly untouchable with full charge, they can lose this charge a myriad of ways. Getting wet, taking temperature damage, and starving. So if you are ever face to face with a WX full of circuits, the best course of action is to try to make them lose charge. Water balloons can do this, but they are incredibly hard to aim. Overall, WX is another very easy PvP character. Just know that they take a lot of setup to get to that point. Next up, Wickerbottom. In a totally default server without sleep nerfs, Wickerbottom will always be a top pick. Why? She essentially has an infinite pan flute in the form of sleepy time stories. That combined with either stun locking or the fire tech can lead Wickerbottom to dominate any PvP server she's in. If sleep isn't nerfed by mods, of course. But that's not all she has going for her. Wickerbottom's strengths in PvP are her Sleepy Time Stories book, and the fact that she can effectively rush higher tier weapons faster than other characters because of her, sciencey brain. But her downside is her sustainability. Using Sleepy Time Stories isn't free and costs her a large chunk of sanity. If she's not wearing a bone helm, then you can try to outlast her. Eventually, the nightmares will get to her. Also, mushy cake and cooked lunar caps can counter her sleep spell entirely due to the fact that they make you not fall asleep. Honestly, because of how niche she is, I would put Wickerbottom in the easy, but not quite very easy difficulty tier of PvP situations. Next up, Woodie. A phenomenal PvP character with access to a powerful form, Moose form. This thing can punch like a truck, has a planar strike if you have it unlocked in the skill tree, and can charge to disengage or catch up with enemies. Oh yeah, he also has the equivalent of a marble suit for damage reduction that's indestructible, and the potential for natural health regen. That's not his only useful form either. Goose can allow for a speedy getaway if an encounter starts to look unfavorable. Woodie's strength is his Goose and Moose form. Both have incredible value for PvP situations, but the Moose form absolutely outshines for all the reasons I stated above. Now, his downsides. First, Moose can be kited when charging. If a player knows how to dodge rook attacks, then they can dodge a Moose charge. And if you somehow manage to hit a tree, then they will get free hits on you. Also, if your Moose form runs out, you will be left armorless. So if you transform back to Woodie too close to your opponent, that will be game over for you. Overall, Woodie is an easy PvP pick, and excellent if you want an all-rounder who can flee situations easily. Next up, we have Wes, and let's just go ahead and skip to the strengths and weaknesses part, because everyone should know the basics about him. Wes's strength is his speed balloons. They help him to leave dicey situations faster than most, but that's where that ends, as Wes's downsides are, well, that he's Wes. Low base stats, low damage multiplier, and pretty much low everything that matters for PvP. Only pick this character if you are some type of legend with kiting others. He goes in the very hard category. Next up, we have Maxwell. Now, Maxwell's a bit tricky. He's as squishy as Wes, but thanks to his spells, he can actually prove to be a bit more interesting in PvP. Shadow Cage lasts a very short time on players, but gathers some shadow gear, and his minions can turn into a blender that turns other players into, well, dead players. The only downside being that you must attack them first for your minions to aggro, which can actually be pretty tricky. He's certainly a high skill PvP player, capable of doing some wacky stuff, but only in the right hands and with the right amount of prep. His strengths in PvP are his spells, primarily his Cage and his Duelist summons, but these do require lots of skill to pull off. And of course, his weakness is his squishiness. Having only 75 health, Maxwell absolutely cannot out-tank other characters, relying purely on skill-based combat. Maxwell is a hard difficulty character, great, but only in the right hands. Next up, we have the Queen of Combat, Wigfrid. And Wigfrid is a phenomenal standard PvP pick. Regens health and sanity on hit, has access to some of the best starting gear, and can get even better gear later down the road. That can cause you to become pretty much untouchable. Wigfrid is a character that ages like fine wine in both PvE and PvP. Her strengths are her damage multiplier and stat regen on hits. This makes her phenomenal at out-tanking other players, only being somewhat threatened by buff Wolfgangs, but without armor she still makes quick work of him. Her downsides are actually pretty soft as well, the biggest one being that her song buffs everyone around her, so utilizing them isn't great in PvP scenarios, as her enemies will be buffed as well. But really, that's it. Wigfrid is another very easy and phenomenal PvP pick that secures an equally powerful late game. Next up, we have Weber. Now, Weber is one of the summoner builds of Don't Starve. That said, he likes others to do his dirty work. Spiders are there to handle the others. Weber's strengths are his spiders, primarily spitters and nurses. Enough of these in an army and you will be quite literally untouchable. Even Willow's blast can't outlast the spitter's power. Ranged attacks are just busted in this game. His downside though, incredibly low sanity, which leads to situations where Weber is fighting a war on two fronts. And without spiders, he's essentially useless. I'm going to put him in medium difficulty. It's not hard to amass an army of spiders, but good luck trying to get through the lag if you are on a populated server. Next up, Winona, the queen of turtling. Winona has access to powerful and mobile catapults. These things can output some serious DPS if you can track a player's movements. Winona's strengths are her catapults. While they unfortunately don't track and lock onto players like NPCs, her remote can manually target them. She's especially strong for dominating the ocean, with catapult boats being able to harass players living on the coast from a safe distance, and sniping players off of boats without sinking them. And her downsides? Fire. Against a Willow especially, Winona's catapults become useless as they can just be burnt down, or the fact that players can just bob and weave into your zone of control and take you out there. But remember, with her skill tree, she does get essentially free revives. So that alone puts her in easy difficulty, since you can eventually Soviet Union your way through any situation by just throwing yourself back at it over and over again. Next up, Worley, a chef who has a secret little dish that can cause him to dominate the PvP field for a limited time. Worley's strengths are his chili powder, which brings him up to par with combat, but that's not all. Defeat a Volt Goat as Worley, and you can make Volt Goat jelly. Combined with chili powder, Worley becomes an untouchable monster, who if you get caught by, you basically just have to accept your fate. The downsides? It's all limited. Volt Goat jelly can just be waited out by your opponent, and he even has a sustainability weakness. If someone destroys your crockpot, then good luck not starving to death on an already picked clean server. Worley is hard, but has potential for sure. I'm definitely curious what his skill tree will bring to the PvP field. Speaking of skill trees, next up we have Wortox. Now, Wortox's biggest PvP boons are the fact that he can teleport and heal at will. He also doesn't have to worry about sustainability, as souls can keep him fed, for no downside if he's naughty as well, which most PvP Wortoxes will gravitate towards because soul jars will allow for some insane wars of attrition. Wortox's PvP strengths are his teleport and his soul pierce. I don't have footage of it because the skill trees aren't out at the time of recording this, and I was too lazy to turn the beta on, but a great PvP strategy as Wortox is to have a soul following you and constantly teleporting in front of your target. This practically guarantees stress-free damage. Be aware that if you only use like one soul, it's not really going to do much against armored targets. You could use the teleport to cut off and attack your targets, but in practice this is actually pretty hard to do as players move unpredictably. Now, his downsides. He's limited by souls, which are harder to stockpile than, say, embers, because of the 20 stack limit. And jars aren't exactly the cheapest thing in the world, meaning a player could just wait until he's out, and boom, no more teleporting. Also, his heals heal everyone nearby, including your PvP targets, so you generally have to waste a soul to leave, and then another one to heal, making it less viable. Overall, I would put Wortox in medium difficulty. In the right hand, he's great, but he's certainly harder to master in PvP. Next, we have Wormwood. This plant boy is actually a surprisingly good PvPer, and that has to do with, you guessed it, his brambles. This is essentially Thorn's armor, which makes Wormwood practically untouchable by any non-ranged weaponry. There's also some techs with his bramble traps, and boats, where you can stack hundreds of them on a shoreline and one-hit players. But I'm not going to count that as a strength since it's highly niche. Wormwood's strengths? Bramble armor. Hands down his best PvP tool, and the one that carries him here. He also has great sustain, being able to go insane at will and become sane at will with seeds. Now, the downside. Fire. Even with a bramble husk on, using a torch on Wormwood will cause him to take insane amounts of damage. And because he can't heal with food, which is another downside, this will cause him to fall quickly. It's especially bad against Willow, who can remotely ignite the poor plant boy. Wormwood goes in hard difficulty because of that fire weakness, and inability to heal with food. It just makes him not too great. And bramble armor is overall weaker than WX's electro circuits, which are also permanent compared to it. Next up, the fish girl Wurt. Much like Weber, Wurt is a minion user, but she has some advantages over other players on her own, unlike Weber, namely her swamp speed and her wetness armor. Wurt's PvP strengths are mostly tied to shadow merms. These guys will have 2 lives and easily kite enemy players, but also, she's faster than others in the swamp, and is immune to damage while wet. She also has the Merm King, which buffs her and her merms significantly. Her downsides? The Merm King also buffs other Wurts, and can be killed by other players very easily. As we all know, and as is obvious, stationary targets are rather hard to defend. She's still better than Weber though, at least in 1-to-1 combat, so she gets the easy category. Next up, the king of range and going insane, Walter, who also just recently got a skill tree. Now, some of you wouldn't believe me here, but Walter was already a phenomenal PvP character. Ranged weaponry is OP in this game, and Walter had access to a pretty much limitless ranged weapon. Prior to his skill tree, Walter's PvP meta looked a little like this. simply outgunning your opponent and walking away. It was slow, but using this method, no players could even touch you. Now, with slingshot upgrades and special rounds, some of which even slow players, yeah, Walter's amazing for PvP. His strengths are obvious. Wabi is a free beefalo, which gives him a massive speed advantage over others, and he's a ranged character, which is only countered by a WX wielding the electro circuits. Slowdown rounds will also be insane once they are released, and allow him to escape bad situations with ease, or set up his enemies to get jumped by monsters, or even other players. As for disadvantages, well, Walter does have a few. Wabi isn't permanent and will buck Walter off if he takes too much damage, which can happen if the opponent also brings ranged weapons to the table. And without Wabi, he's susceptible to lots of damage that will lower his sanity alongside his health. But in the right hands, Walter should be practically untouchable, so he gets a spot in very easy difficulty. Man, who knew that the character that most people considered the worst for PvE is actually a PvP powerhouse? And finally, Wanda. She takes a long time to set up, but her alarming clock can actually outrange others, allowing for easy hits on any non-special character. For characters like Willow, Wanda can bait out her blast with her backstep watch. And for healing, Wanda comes equipped with powerful ageless watches. Wanda's PvP strength is her skill cap, which is actually, honestly, also her downside. Much like PvE, Wanda in PvP takes a lot of skill to fully utilize. Get caught in one of Willow's blasts, even with armor, and you're practically dead thanks to the damage plus the freezing. It takes skill to understand when to backstep out of the way. She is, however, especially strong against characters with no ranged attacks. I'm gonna put her in easy. She has potential to dominate, but you have to really know how to utilize her kit. And that right there is all of the characters ranked for PvP alongside the basics. Now I'm gonna share a few advanced PvP tips. These can be used with any character, even Wilson. First, remember that PvP doesn't always have to utilize combat. Remember how I said that Moggles are incredibly powerful? A great tactic to defeating your foes is to sometimes use Charlie to do your dirty work. Using water balloons or an ice staff or even snowballs if you are in the Winter's Feast event, you can put out your opponent's fire and then watch as Charlie does all the work for you with your night vision. Speaking of ice staffs, another far weaker version of the pan flute that may be your only option in a PvP server that nerfs them is the ice staff. This does the same thing that the pan flute does, however it takes far more uses and lasts shorter, and won't inflict grogginess. It can still be used to cage your opponent, however, or if you have a group, you can use it to prepare a massive stun lock. Speaking of friends, there is strength in numbers when it comes to Don't Starve PvP. A 1v1 is hard, but even, and a 2v1 is practically impossible if all of the players are of an equal skill level. This is because with a friend you can avoid getting stun locked, be woken up if you fall asleep, and have huge synergies depending on the characters chosen. Just be sure that teaming isn't against the server's rules, since getting banned would probably not be very fun. And finally, range is king. If your enemy can't retaliate, your odds of success have just gone way up. Blow darts are surprisingly underutilized, but can both stun lock from range and dish out immense amount of damage. So rushing some of those, especially if you have Willows in your server, may be a necessity. And there you have it. Hopefully this guide/ranking video convinced some of you to try out this rather imbalanced but fun when you set it up right version of Don't Starve Together. For maximum fun, I would generally suggest mods like PvP Revamped, as it nerfs pan flutes, but doesn't get rid of their usefulness. It turns them from the I win button of PvP into just another slowdown tool. You can also tweak tons of other stuff that makes PvP slightly more balanced and enjoyable. Link to it is in the description. And then there's total overhaul PvP mods, like what you're seeing right here, that balance the game entirely. This mod will also be in the description if you want to try it out. It's called Deathmatch, and it's genuinely really fun. It's been a blast talking about all this stuff, but now it's time to end the video. If this helped you, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already, and leave your own PvP tips in the comments down below. After that, check out this video for more entertainment. This has been Polarlotus, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.